The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
I am Stacy Graham. I'm one of the 3 people who works on the Teaching with Primary Sources MTSU program. I work at the MTSU Center for Historic Preservation, and I also teach in the MTSU History Department. And those of you who are new to Teaching with Primary Sources, we do a lot of different activities throughout the year, and we will be offering future workshops. So just go to our website, click on upcoming workshops, and stay tuned. We try to deliver the highest quality professional development we can that will help you help your students meet curriculum standards and develop historical thinking skills. But basically, we're not here for your students so much as you. We want to save you time by giving you materials that you can use without spending hours on the Library of Congress website looking for stuff. So we've tried to do that for you. But we are very mindful of all the changes in the social studies curriculum standards, which they seem to change a lot too. And so with the new social studies practices standards that have been added officially this fall, we have been working those into all of our workshops and activities pretty much very consistently. Of course, this is nothing new. These are strategies y'all have been doing, but they're now made very explicit and given numbers. So we try to bring those out in what we do so that you can be like, look, we're doing these in our classroom because that's, that's what they said they were doing. So one of the things that, one of the historical thinking skills that we're really trying to develop more materials on is argumentation. How you detect an argument, how you build an argument, how you identify elements of an argument within primary source texts. So this is something that we haven't explicitly done a lot of in the past, and so we are trying to build more activities around it. Now, there are different ways to detect and write arguments. For one thing, there's the arguments that you want your students to learn how to write when they are writing essays on historical topics. And there are a lot of different websites and materials that kind of break this down. And I looked at a bunch of these websites and I kind of summed it up in these 5 steps, which are probably nothing new to you. So in other words, you start with a claim. That's of course what the thesis statement would be. And the thing that can be argued, without which there is no argument. Your reasons for that claim. Your evidence supporting that. So this is where you would have a quote, or you'd have a statistic, or something that's like, this is something that's not arguable, this is evidence that supports the reasons. Then of course you have to acknowledge the fact that there are some counter arguments out there, and there are sources that say other things. And if you don't acknowledge that, then you are opening the door for people to attack you. And then conclusion. Conclusion is nice. Restatement of your claim in the light of what you argued. So that's kind of what I've come across. And I'm going to try to be developing more activities in the future that kind of build off of these different things. But I decided, well, let's have an example. Let's do a 1-paragraph example going through each of these different steps. So spoiler alert, just off the top of my head, I was like, I'll do a Game of Thrones one. So, the 8th and final season of Game of Thrones fails to do justice to its main characters. That is my
claim.
That's the claim, right? Okay.
Seems pretty accurate.
The character arcs, so carefully crafted through 8 seasons, do not land the main characters in culminating situations that reflect what they've learned and accomplished or not accomplished. That's my reason. And you can kind of detect what a reason is because you put a because in front of it. So claim, because, reason. Tyrion ends up in the same position he held in season 2. Jon ends up in the exact same place as season 1 with nothing to show for the revelations of season 8. Bran ends up in an equally confining chair, and we all know what happens to Dany. That's what?
Evidence.
That's the evidence, okay? Sure, Sansa does end up in a deserved position of power that she would not have otherwise had if it weren't for what her brothers experienced, but she's an exception. So that would be like a counter-argument. The last season of Game of Thrones is necessarily riveting for its final reveals of where people end up, but unsatisfactory for not following through on the promises of the previous seasons. So that's the conclusion. So that's kind of the basis of your 5-point, essay. This could even be the first paragraph of a long opinion piece on Entertainment Weekly to come, or what have you. But that's the basic structure and recognizable. However, we are not so lucky when we deal with the primary sources that we have to use for our students. They are not so cut and dry as that. It is not so easy to identify those different elements sometimes, especially when you're dealing with what I thought would be fun, the Age of Enlightenment. I went to Edinburgh this summer and just got a little bit carried away with the Scottish Enlightenment and thought, oh, it'd be so great to develop all these materials on the Enlightenment when I got back, and now I'm regretting it. So we're not going to deal with all 5 of those. They're not to be found in the excerpts that I pulled. So we're just going to deal with 2 things today, claims and reasons, because those can be confusing for your students. What's the difference? What does one look like? So for simplicity, I'm going to have claims in green, and I'm going to have reasons in blue. Now, these are the things that I think are claims and reasons, and you guys might disagree with me on certain excerpts. That's totally fine, and we can talk about that. But first of all, what is a claim? So a claim is a general statement that governs the rest of the argument. So here you have your umbrella statement. Everything has to fit under the umbrella. It is a statement that argues something specific and which can be supported with evidence. So it's not an opinion. It's not a fact. It's something that can be debated. And it's also what you usually call the thesis statement when you're talking about an essay. And what is a reason then? So a reason is a hopefully logical statement that supports the claim in a relevant and effective way. Also, it's an answer to the question of why the author believes the claim. So it's meant to persuade you to believe the claim too. And this is where the word because comes in really handy. Claim, because, reason. But it's not the same as evidence. And we'll have a little bit of evidence thrown into our activity for today. So it's hard to kind of weed that out totally. So evidence would be what? How would evidence be different from a reason?
Evidence is factual. Reasoning is just your own ideas or your thoughtfulness about it.
Or how you're going to use it?
How you're going to use it.
To
support your
claim?
evidence.
Yeah, so evidence is that stuff that you pull from the primary sources. Evidence is like the raw materials, and reasoning is how you kind of build with the raw materials. All right, now here's one of my favorite websites that I ran into when I was looking up all these different things. It's from the Department of Communication at the University of Pittsburgh. So this is talking about claims, reasons, and evidence. And basically, claims are statements about what is true or good about what should be done or believed and are potentially arguable. A liberal arts education prepares students best is a claim, while I didn't like the book is not. So reasons are statements of support for claims, making those claims something more than mere assertions. So reasons are statements in an argument that pass 2 tests. So this is They're answers to the challenge of your claim. So why do you say that? Something I say to my 8-year-old all the time. Why do you say that? What makes you say that? And then what reason can you give me to believe that? So in other words, persuade me. Reasons can be linked to claims with the word because. So this is, I think, one of the best kind of rules of thumb. Liberal arts is best because it teaches students independent thinking. That was Newman's best because it presented the most difficult role. I wonder which one they were thinking about. But anyway, global warming is real because the most reputable science points in that direction. Everyone should stop wearing seatbelts because it would save lives. Now, that's a claim with a reason. They're going to have evidence. I think we can all tell that that's going to be a not so strong argument there because their counter argument is probably going to be way heavier than the actual argument. But it's still a claim plus a reason. So it doesn't mean it's going to be right. That's why you have to argue it. That's why you grade arguments based on how strong they are. Okay, so let's take an example. And we're going to use one of our more familiar primary sources from the Age of Enlightenment, which is the Declaration of Independence. And so I'm using this to model because I think this is a document that we're more familiar with than we are with, two treatises on government or the Leviathan. So this one is one of my favorite versions of it because it's the very first printed version that has all the names of the signers. You have the rough draft, you have Jefferson's original rough draft, you have the first printed version, and then you have the first printed version with all the names of the signers printed on there. And this one I like also because it was published by Mary Catherine Goddard. And she was a female printer, and she has a really interesting story all of her own. This, of course, is hyperlinked to where you can get it on the Library of Congress, and it also, you can just click on the PDF transcription from the very same page. And so I just kind of copied and pasted all this text from that PDF transcription. So I skipped the preamble in case you're wondering. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What do you think that is? Claim or reason?
That's their claim.
I obviously thought so too because I highlighted it in green. Okay. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So what do you think that is?
It's a reason.
I think I called it a second claim. But like I said, this is kind of hard to tell in a lot of these things. So I'm not standing by my decisions like 100%.
Well, it's a parallel structure.
I think it's a two things. We hold these truths, that this and that this. So that's kind of where I was coming from. And plus, these are pretty bold claims. So prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown, basically we don't need any evidence, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer where evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. In other words, people are lazy and they like what's familiar, right? So what do you think that is?
Reason.
A reason? I don't even remember. Oh, okay. Apparently I thought that those were reasons as well. Okay, so we claim this because of these things. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such a government and to provide new guards for the future security. What do you think that would be?
Claim.
For some reason, I put that as a reason. But it sounds like a claim too. So this is where I'm like, these primary sources, they're not really cut and dry. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Okay, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. What do you think that would be?
He's setting up his evidence.
Evidence.
I think I put that's a claim, but I also said, oh, that sounds like a reason too. So that's why it switches from green to blue. Now, evidence I put in this dark gold. This is what portion of the Declaration of Independence follows here. What do we call that now? He did this, he did that, he's doing this. This is what we're suffering. This is the grievances.
No grievances.
Yeah. And the grievances is the evidence, right? You can't, this is not a line of reasoning here. This is a statement of what the king has done. So this is your evidence. So there's a whole list of this, which you may or may not have read through at some point and then skipped every other time, which is what we're going to do today, hence the ... So I've just put the first two there because, TJ knew who he was doing and he knew how to build in some evidence. So I don't think I need to put every single one of those in there. Okay, so at the end of the list of grievances, we're getting to the very end of the declaration here. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. What do you think that might be?
This is a conclusion.
I am thinking that's a reason. Why did I think that?
Oh, I think that's a claim.
Think that's a claim? I think this is the reason for why we have a right to abolish our government, because this prince is unfit. So I guess it depends on what goes before the because. But yeah, see what I mean? When I was trying to set up this activity, I was much more and more frustrated with these sources for not being more clear about how they were constructed.
But if we translate it into simpler English, we have a right to set up a new government because we've asked you to change and you haven't. You've acted like a tyrant instead of a benevolent prince. So if we make it simpler, then I think it's easier to see the connections than get stuck in their language.
Yes. And that's probably the smarter thing to do in the classroom.
Especially, I'm have 8th grade, not high school or college. Yeah.
Because that is the time at which they learned this very, very complicated document. And of course, this document was not written for 8th graders at the time. It was written for the most elite people in the United States. So expecting 8th graders to not only be able to read it, but also be able to define the elements of the argument within is a bit much. So this is why I want your ideas on how you would do it. But this is also just me showing you the experience of reading a primary source and trying to figure out where the argument is and being very frustrated in that process. And so I think when we talk about constructing arguments in the standards, I think they're mostly trying to think of how your students are going to construct an argument using primary source evidence, which is easier. That's the Game of Thrones paragraph. But in terms of finding it in these antiquated documents, that's another matter. So this is why I'm teaching this to all of you very experienced teachers. Okay, well, we're close to the end, so let's see what we've got. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. Okay, I guess I said that was a claim. We have warned them because we have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would have inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. Yeah. These are the things we did. Okay, maybe it's a little bit biased in the words that they choose to describe, but this is what we did. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and peace friends. So we must therefore. So in other words, this is a concluding statement, which I just took to be kind of a conclusion, restatement of the claim. Here's the last one. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. Boom. Birth of America. Right? That's all it took. Nope. Just kidding. I did a little trick thing here because I used purple basically to mean declaration, because this is the Declaration of Independence and they're declaring this. So in other words, it would be a claim in the light of all the evidence and reasoning that we put forward. So yeah, we are free and we ought to be free and independent. That's pretty much a claim. This is what they're trying to state to Great Britain and argue as justification for everything that comes afterwards. And I'm not sure how seriously it was taken by Great Britain at the time. Probably took them a while to realize that the colonies meant this. But anyway, I just threw in the link to where you can get the PDF transcription, which is slightly off of the link to the document that I had before. So this is kind of what I have in mind for you all to do with 4 other selected documents from the European Enlightenment, which are perhaps not as familiar to you as the Declaration of Independence, and just as fun to sift through for claims and reasons, and you're all going to be very unhappy with me at the end of this. But like I said, this is me trying to work through this, see what's the best way to approach this topic, and whether or not primary source documents from the Age of Enlightenment should be used in this way at all, because they're really tough. But anyway, from our website, I just want to show you basically, how many of you get our TPS newsletter? Did you see the last issue, the one for this month? So the theme for this month was all about the Enlightenment. And this is something that is touched on very not so much when you're talking about the US history. But if you're teaching world history at the high school level, you do have some pretty solid curriculum standards to get through. So that's kind of what we were trying to address. Okay, so I did this lesson idea on man's state of nature using the 4 people who were named in the, W.03 in that particular curriculum standard. And so I made some handouts where I excerpted from the most famous works of these 4 people, where they talk about the state of nature, which is the state that man is in before government sets in. And then how does that lead to, what are their thoughts on the social contract? Because the social contract is what our Constitution is. You know, the Declaration of Independence is pretty much a preamble to the Constitution. So the ones are Hobbes, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and John Locke. So I have these handouts for you, we're going to divide into 4 groups. And before I pass out the text, this is a complete and utter beta version. This is not what's going to appear on our ultimate tools page of graphic organizers, but this is a first shot at just kind of giving you a place to think about claim and reason. So I'm not saying that there are 3 claims and 3 groups of reasons on each one of these. That is not going to be perfectly the case, but at least this will give you a place to start thinking about it. And if you want to write them down verbatim from your text, that's fine. If you want to put it in your own words, that's fine too. Sometimes they're put so well, it's hard to put them in your own words. And I actually did this worksheet with each of these things, so I kind of beta-baited it. But the design of this lesson plan in the newsletter, it's basically just passing this out and having you all think about what reasoning do they give, like what do they think the state of man is, like what is man in the state of nature, and what is the need for a social contract. So it's much more open-ended. It's not trying to bring out the components of an argument. But okay, you guys will be Thomas Hobbes. Lucky you. And at the top of each sheet, in the box, that's secondary source context. It's either lifted straight from the Library of Congress website or slightly reworded from someplace else. There you go. And you guys are Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You're welcome. Each of these 4 was incredibly influential on our founding fathers. John Locke, very influential on Thomas Jefferson. Montesquieu was very influential on Madison in terms of our Constitution and the Federalist Papers. And Hobbes came earlier, so through Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau, Hobbes influences. But Hobbes was very influential for Madison as well. And then, of course, Rousseau, the social contract, also very influential. So, take some time to read your excerpts and see if you can identify claims and reasons.
The continuing.
Yes, right.
Doesn't break down so nicely.
No.
At all.
Some of it does. Some of it's a little backwards.
Generally, the entire thing is kind of revolving around that one statement. At the point in which the state of nature or the obstacles to human preservation have become greater than each individual with his own strength can cope with.
Have to be united, you have to be conjoined with your people in order to establish your laws. And what you think the will of those people are.
There are limits, we create systems to limit, we relinquish our natural rights so that we don't hurt each other, basically, right?
All right, let's take a moment and then we'll all kind of take turns reporting out. Now, I did want to bring your attention before I forget to the fact that this is the second newsletter in a row that I've been trying to start prying apart arguments. The newsletter for the previous month is looking at historical thinking skills, and I'm talking about constructing an argument using different sources about the Stamp Act 1765. Now, this is slightly different because it's asking your students to construct the argument based on primary sources that are either pro or against what the British did. So that's probably the way in which your standards are wanting you to use argumentation with your students, is get your students to construct the argument based on primary sources as evidence. But I thought it would be important to see how the primary sources themselves constructed arguments, and I thought that Enlightenment sources would be a great way to do that, because why? This is the age of reason. These people are at the vanguard of creating the whole idea of a logical argument. So I was like, great, we'll use them. And now I'm regretting it. I'm just kidding. But okay, so we'll go through, and these are just in slightly chronological order here, not necessarily in order of influence or anything like that. But we'll start with Hobbes, then we'll go Locke, and then Montesquieu, and then Rousseau. So basically you can see that none of this is cut and dry, but let me know what you came up with. Starting with the name of the stuffed tiger from Calvin and Hobbes, right? He was named after this guy.
So, men are in a constant state of readiness for struggle.
Okay.
Is a claim.
Okay.
No?
Or not?
No, I'm not going to say right or wrong. I'm going to say that sounds good to me. In fact, that is what I have on mine.
And the reason for that is because they have no reason to expect otherwise.
Right. I'm laughing because it is just kind of a sad state of affairs, isn't it? This is the guy who says that men's lives are nasty, poor, brutish, short.
They're awful.
That kind of guy, yeah.
They're awful because you don't expect them not to be awful. You have no reason.
Okay, that's right. We're not entitled here. Yeah.
Right. So, claim and reason.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So A because B.
Yep. So, in that state of constant struggle, there is no sense of justice or injustice. And the reason for that is without a common law or power, justice cannot be agreed upon and thus exists.
Yeah, there is no justice if there is no law, because the law says what is just and unjust. It's like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, and reasons are supposed to make sense logically.
And this last one's a little iffy, but I think it's written a little iffily. Okay, because they fear death, men are drawn to peace, which requires laws. And
in entering into the agreement of having that law, they're giving up some of their...
And because they want that peace, they will give up certain rights.
Yeah, that's what I put too. Yeah, so men voluntarily give up some of their rights, some of their freedom to live in peace. That is the social contract according to Hobbes. And I didn't have a follow-up reason for that. Did y'all?
Yeah, I think it was all a reason, or
Yeah.
all a claim, but we broke it in some ways too.
See, I was expecting so much clarity from these guys, and I ended up, is this a claim or a reason? Could be both. And so this is kind of where the activity crashed and burned a little bit. But I think it's right for us to at least learn the difference between a claim and a reason, and this is learning the hard way. But I think that you guys did a really good job. I feel validated because that's what I came up with too. Okay, so Locke.
Locke's making some of the same arguments, it seems, that while we would have enjoyed more time to sort through all of his thoughts and language, it seems that perhaps his claim is that we actually do need laws, that government arises because, maybe counter-argument, although men naturally exist in a state of perfect freedom, God has driven him into society, and since he's not at liberty to destroy himself, we do need political society where every one of the members hath quitted this natural power, resigned it up to the hands of the community in all cases that exclude him not from appealing for protection to the law. At first we thought, well, he's going to give us a nice thesis statement at the beginning and then support it, but it seems that perhaps he built a case at the end. At least that's where.
And these are excerpts too. I could have excerpted it out like the most obvious claim. I don't think I did.
Well, I think he provides context for his rationale rather than starting out with this claim.
You know, instead of this claim reason, I almost made a graphic organizer that was just called train of thought. Box, arrow, box, arrow, box, arrow, box. You know, I almost did that, but I thought, well, that's not doing anything about claims versus reasons. But you can see that's kind of how they're writing. And they're not actually even offering up a whole lot of evidence either, because this is political philosophy, not an historian following the historiographic method here.
That's okay, because, I mean, the first 5-point structure that you gave us is still really useful, even if now we've gone to a next level of complexity.
You use the 5-point structure and use these excerpts from these guys as evidence in writing your 5-point essay, basically. But yeah, I mean, recognizing, and I know that my students don't like it when I'm like, well, I'm just going to tell you how everything's more complicated than you thought it was. But like, you know, at least recognizing that in primary sources that these things are sometimes hard to detect, you know. Let's just toss some water on their faces, so. Good, all right, so Locke, very good example of this, then this, then this, then this. I don't know. I thought that one was one of my the easier ones to fill out. I actually have all 8 boxes filled in. Montesquieu. This is how far I got with Montesquieu.
Okay, basically, you go ahead.
Oh, well, I read it, and I think we had different ideas on it. And I guess when you get down to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in, that was where I got a little clarity, I hope. Mm-hmm. When the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty. I think that's clearly a claim.
Yes, this is the separation of powers.
Yes, and then we get to because, so I'm thinking that's the reason. Apprehensions may arise lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner.
2019.
I thought that. And so these young ladies were happy enough to let me go ahead and make my one thing that I understood.
Well, hey, that's a very good, clear claim and a very good, clear reason. And in fact, you know, if you are going to do a worksheet, you could even write the claim yourself and have your students just like fish out what the reason is. Like that might actually be the easier thing to do for them. I wouldn't actually toss them into this swimming pool just yet. All right, good. Rousseau.
Okay. This one was interesting. Man was born free, but everywhere he's in chains.
Famous line.
That is the claim, and we kind of had the entire second paragraph be the reason. At the point in the state of nature when the obstacles to human preservation had become greater than each individual with his own strength can cope, an antiquate combination of forces must be the result of men coming together.
Okay.
Besides that, it's all repetition of kind of the same words and ideas. Once this multitude is united this way into a body, an offense against one of its members is an offense against the body politic. That was kind of the last claim.
Yep.
Then ending off with duty and interest thus equally require the two contradicting parties to aid each other mutually.
Okay. So, and I think we kind of hear the same language emerging from these 4 documents here, which is in a state of nature, man has pure freedom, but must give up some of that insofar as he's willing to protect the freedom of others. So it's this compromise point, and that's called civil society. It's where you come together, you give up this, but you get to keep that. And it would work for everybody, because who would want to possibly not do this for their fellow man, right? Well, that's an assumption that bless their hearts, right? Okay, now what you could do with these 2 would be to excerpt those things even further if you wanted to just bring out what you think are the clearest kind of claims and reasons, and then have the students write a short essay where it's, you know, why do men come together out of a state of nature and form governments? And then that would be, you know, your question. Then they would have to make a claim that would answer that question and then reason it, and then this would be their evidence. So that would be a way to use these as primary sources instead of mining them for the elements of the argument themselves, which I think is most commonly how they are used by students now. I just think that because these are famous works embodying the first times that European society is using reason instead of religious and moral arguments, even though Locke to some degree is like, well, our our Creator gave us these things, so we have no right to do away with our own lives. But we're still kind of getting away from that and relying on reason to provide, because there's an actual reason, not because of God or because the monarch says so. So this is actually a really significant moment. It just yields a lot of very confusing primary sources.
And they're all within 1 century, right? Or
no, Hobbes is when? Hobbes is earlier.
He's in the 17th century.
He's 17th century. Was he dies in 1688 or something?
17. He published this in 1690.
Okay, and then Locke is late 17th century. Then Montesquieu is what, early 18th? And this is a historically very full, I mean, it's always full, but period where you're coming out of, this is the response to the establishment of constitutional monarchy in England, where, this is political philosophy making politics what it is today, and then the culmination, the Declaration of Independence, because of course the American document is the culmination of all the European documents, right?
But what I'm getting from this that'll help me in my baby history, in my 8th grade history class, is that because I haven't thought about all of these for a whole half hour, right? As background, if this is the philosophical climate on both continents, then by the time Tom Paine publishes Common Sense, it would seem like common sense. Actually, there would have been such a paper trail of philosophy, like-minded philosophers, that everybody would have to say, "You're right. We hadn't thought about it that way. That it is common sense by now. It's established philosophical reasoning."
And Thomas Paine was actually really influential back on the Europeans. Yeah. So if you click on the link in this lesson idea that's just Enlightenment, it takes you to this exhibit, this online exhibit at the British Library that has a really nice little kind of narrative with primary sources. So this exhibit and then the exhibit from the Library of Congress that it's also linked from here, based on this Library of Congress online exhibition. They're really good for kind of being your secondary source, or I guess tertiary source, for what's going on, because it is both European and American history.